Today we are visiting the Bendigo Cemetery, formerly known as the Back Creek Cemetery and the Sandhurst Cemetery, in Bendigo, Victoria, to visit the place where an English convict transported to Australia in 1830 is buried. His name was William Cochran. We will also visit Dead Dog Gully, the place where William lived into his old age and scraped out a living in search of gold. It was also the place of his sad and traumatic death in 1865. Came from Wapping in London. It's a borough in London, and he was 5'4.25". He was 24 years old when he was transported, and his complexion was swarthy, which just meant that it was a bit dark, probably sunburned. He had an oval head, dark brown hair, dark brown whiskers. He had an oval visage and a perpendicular forehead. So that's quite detailed, isn't it? A perpendicular forehead. He had grey eyes, and I find that the ChatGPT does struggle with the concept of grey eyes. So his image comes up with blue eyes, but he actually had grey eyes. He had a medium long nose, medium wide mouth, medium long chin, and he had pock marks, and he also had a tattoo of a crucifix on the inside of his right arm. And here he is, or what the Find My Convict Ancestor ChatGPT has given me anyway. And here he is at 24 years old when he was transported. And then I've asked for an older version of him when he was 70, when he died, after he'd led a long, hard life of brickmaking and gold seeking. He was on the chain gangs in Tasmania. He lived a pretty tough life. And so this is William at 70, according to ChatGPT anyway. William was convicted at the Middlesex Jail Delivery in London on the 14th of January 1830 for stealing one pair of trousers. He had one previous conviction for larceny and had spent 6 weeks in a house of correction. Now, the judge and jury must have been having a particularly bad day on the 14th of January because William was sentenced to transportation for life for the crime of stealing one pair of trousers. Just let that sink in. William's parents were both Irish, even though William was born in London, and I wonder if that is the reason why William was treated so harshly. Now, here we have the Methodist ground, and this is where William is buried. He has no headstone, and I couldn't find the number of his grave, so he's buried somewhere there in the dirt. So on January the 28th, William was transferred to the Hulk Retribution, which was moored at Woolwich on the Thames, where his behaviour was reported as orderly. A few months later, William was put on the transportation ship the David Lion, which departed from Sheerness for Van Diemen's Land. The voyage lasted 3 months, arriving in Hobart on August 18th. There were around 220 male convicts on board. The master of the ship was James Berry and the ship's surgeon was Charles Cameron. When William arrived in Hobart, his police number was 1107. He was assigned to public works. Now, being assigned to public works meant that the convict was required to work on government projects rather than being assigned to a private master or employer. These projects often included building and maintaining roads, bridges and public buildings, clearing land and preparing it for agricultural use, working in government-run workshops and factories. Convicts assigned to public works typically faced hard labour and strict supervision. William was stationed at the prisoners' barracks in Hobart, which had been built in 1821 as accommodation for convicts employed in government works. Now, William had a number of misdemeanours on his convict record. On March 8, 1831, he was punished for being drunk and disorderly. His punishment was to be deprived of working on Saturday afternoon. Now, that might sound like a strange punishment, but after a little research, I found the following explanation. Being denied of working meant that a convict was denied the opportunity to earn a small amount of personal time or privileges that came with completing their work. Convicts who worked diligently were sometimes allowed a brief respite or minor rewards, so losing this time was a way to enforce discipline and to ensure compliance. Additionally, the deprivation of work could also have been psychologically punishing. Convicts often found that having structured work helped them cope with the harsh conditions of penal life. Removing this structure could lead to increased feelings of isolation and frustration. So William behaved himself for the next 2 years before he was punished again on the 11th of March 1833 for being absent from his duty on a Saturday night last and drunk. His punishment was imprisonment and hard labour at the prison barracks in Hobart. 9 months later, on December the 27th, William was caught being depraved and out after hours, and it was reported to the police superintendent. There was no reported punishment for this, which is interesting. Now, being depraved sounds rather extreme, but what did it mean? The term depraved typically referred to a convict's moral character and behaviour. It indicated that the individual was considered morally corrupt or wicked, often due to repeated offences or particularly severe crimes, and in this case it could have just meant that he was Irish or of Irish extract. This label would have been used to describe someone who was seen as having a deeply flawed character, making them more difficult to reform or manage within the penal system. I suggest that William was again found drunk and disorderly and out after hours, but we'll never know. Another year went by and William behaved himself, but on the 15th of January 1835, William was to receive his most severe punishment to date. His convict record recorded his whereabouts as Lone G, Long. Well, that's what I believe it says. It was quite hard to read on the record. Did this mean that he'd been loaned out for a government project? I'm not sure. So if anyone has any more information, please drop a comment below. Anyhow, it was January and William refused to work. His punishment was 6 days on the treadmill. In Australia, the treadwheel was a secondary punishment for male convicts, handed out by the magistrates and originally seen as being less repulsive than inflicting corporal pain such as flogging. The first public treadmill in Hobart was located inside the prison barracks and used for grinding wheat. So basically, he grinded wheat for 6 days. So after his 6 days on the wheel, he was placed in the brick fields. And here is a brick made by convicts at the Hobart Barracks, maybe even by William, and it has the broad arrow in the centre, which meant it was government property, and every brick that William made while he was a convict would have had to have this symbol on it to prevent thievery. Now, this particular brick is part of the chapel at the barracks where William was imprisoned, and no doubt William would have had to have gone to chapel every Sunday. Now, William stayed out of trouble for 2 years until on the 30th of June 1837 he was caught being in a public house, basically a pub, with some men who were under his charge in the brickmaking gang. And he received another 6 days on the treadwheel. The punishment of a second turn on the wheel must have been enough to keep him out of trouble because no further crimes are marked against his name. During his time in Hobart, William was also assigned to a Mr. de Graves, probably Peter de Graves, the well-known brewer and mill owner. Peter owned a brewery, a sawmill, and a flour mill, and a bakehouse on his property, so he was a very successful businessman. And no doubt William's free labour helped improve his bank account, de Graves's bank account. So William received his ticket of leave in 1838, and then his conditional pardon in November 1845. Now, the note on his record read that he'd held his ticket of leave above the required period and that his conduct was good. But again, is it just me, or is William receiving harsher than necessary treatment? So a year before obtaining his conditional pardon, he married fellow convict Alan Scott on the 11th of March 1844 at St John's Church in Launceston. The couple were married by the Reverend Brown. Now watch out for my next video. It will be all about the wild strumpet that was Alan Scott. What a story that woman has.
Plug me in.
William and Alan moved to Victoria sometime between 1844 and 1853, so just after they got married. I can't find any record of their passage over from Tasmania or any of their movements in Victoria, but again, that is not unusual in Gold Rush Victoria. I do have sworn testimony that they were living in Bendigo from at least 1853, but more about that later. From the records, I can find the couple struggled financially and they never had any children. But I do know they lived in Bendigo for at least 12 years. Alan died in 1863 at the Wesleyan Immigrants' Home in Melbourne from dysentery. And William made his way back to Bendigo, and we know he lived at the Alluvial Gold Workings in Dead Dog Gully. Now here's me trying to find Dead Dog Gully. I had a bit of a time trying to find it. Well, there is one sign and I had seen a photo of it, so I knew it existed and I did eventually find it. But Bendigo is surrounded by old diggings and old camps where just thousands of people lived, and looking at it today, you just never know. And not many locals know. And so this was Dead Dog Gully, and I found this really interesting article in Trove, and it's Memories of the 60s. Now, the man who wrote this meant the 1860s, not the 1960s. Because I was like, how did Dead Dog Gully get its name? Well, he said in the early 40s of last century, meaning 1840s, Bendigo's first pastoralist, Mr. Charles Sheard, contemplating the calm beauty of his domain, nearly broke into song. So in the early 50s, 1850s, 30,000 diggers proceeded to alter that landscape with such ruthless energy that what had been a densely wooded ridge became Bald Hill, and the rest of the hills were going that way. The tiny watercourses silted up and vegetation disappeared from the valleys, now encumbered with a million low yellow mounds, each adjoining a shallow pit. We call them mullikeeps. Here and there on the ridges, larger mounds, pale blue variations. Okay, blah blah blah. Da, da. It says the dainty little dells had become gullies and flats with names to suit all tastes. So thus there were Dead Dog Gully, Dead Cat Gully, Pig Face Gully, Dead Bullock Creek, and Beelzebub Gully. And again, Elysium Flat, no idea what that is. Robinson Crusoe Gully, Jobs Gully. Some of those still exist actually. Jobs Gully still exists. And Tipperary Gully. Quite appropriate were Opossum Gully, Kangaroo Flat, Jackass Flat, Eaglehawk Flat, Sparrowhawk Gully, and Emu Creek. There was also a garden gully, a very unhappy looking, when the diggers had done their worst, Happy Valley, and a Paddy's Gully owned by a Scotsman. So there was a little bit of humour there as well. So I'm assuming, because I couldn't find it anywhere else, that Dead Dog Gully just meant maybe there were some dead dogs there. If anyone has any more information about how Dead Dog Gully became Dead Dog Gully, leave a comment and let us all know. William survived Alan 2 years before taking his own life in sad circumstances in 1865. And the inquest into William's death provides many insights into his life and tragic passing. It was held at the Robert Burns Inn at Back Creek the day after William's death and included 12 male jurors and 3 male witnesses. The official finding was that William came by his death between 9 and 4 o'clock on yesterday, the 17th day of December. The deceased came suddenly by his death from strangulation at the tent of one Jack Mannington in Dead Dog Gully, in the district of Sandhurst. The deceased, having with his own hands hung himself from the ridgepole of the said tent while labouring under temporary insanity. The first witness was William Dorman. He was the superintendent of the Bendigo Benevolent Asylum. Dorman testified that the 3 days prior to William's death, William had made an application to the committee of the asylum for admission. He was recommended by the Reverend William Roby Fletcher, who was pastor of the Congregational Church in Bendigo. But unfortunately, there was no vacancy at the asylum. There was even one inmate obliged to be accommodated in the corridor where he slept. Dorman continued, "The committee on that day, Thursday last, ordered his admission immediately when a bed became vacant. Meantime, the deceased was to receive from me 1/4 pound of tea, 3 pounds of sugar, and 4 pounds of bread. So William was provided with a small amount of food." Dorman continues, I inquired of the deceased where he lived in order that I could visit him or send him word of a vacancy. He then informed me that he had been living at Joseph Barton's at Bendigo Flat, but that he might not stop there long. I asked him to leave word with the Reverend Fletcher or to come to me as to when I could find time in the event of a vacancy. He left and I have heard nothing of him since, until this morning. The deceased had been with me, I think, on Monday or Tuesday last for an admission form, which I gave him. On neither of those occasions did the deceased appear to be in such a state of mind or body to commit suicide, but he seemed an old and not a strong man. The next witness to testify was Joseph Barton, and Joseph was a saddler. Joseph stated that he had known William for 12 years and that he was a sober man. He said, "I have never ever seen him drunk. He was of a something, I couldn't read the writing, temper, and at one time had been a pious Christian. I remember his wife. She had been some 2 years dead. William was from London, but of Irish parents. Latterly he was poor, but not in ill health. The deceased stopped with me last Friday week, the 8th of December, until the 14th, and after that he was not at my place, for he said he would not have me walking after my daily work. And I'm not 100% sure what that means, but I would suggest it means that William didn't want Joseph having to do anything extra to look after him. So he went to Dead Dog Gully, as I had to leave to give him my indecipherable, I have no idea what that says. My family lived at Dead Dog Gully. William came here to my wife's brother's tent, and it is covered with bark, where he hung himself. The last time I saw William alive was at my brother-in-law's tent on yesterday, Sunday morning. He appeared very dispirited. He was a brickmaker by trade, and yesterday he said to me that he had made 20,000 bricks for a man up the country who had done him out of the money. The deceased several times burst into tears while stopping with me at Bendigo Flat. I knew he had been at the benevolent asylum last week. He seemed cast down after he'd been there. I heard him say he wished he had died before his wife. They had no family. The deceased never threatened to take his life to my knowledge. Had I any suspicion, I never would have left him yesterday morning. He was alone at my brother-in-law's tent. My brother-in-law, being a single man, was not well, and he was at my house while I was at his tent with the deceased yesterday morning, about 9 o'clock. At that time I found the deceased had no fire in the tent, so I took him a billy of hot tea from my tent and left him eating and drinking. At about 4 o'clock in the evening I again returned to see the deceased. A man named James Stevens accompanied me. When I got to the tent, I saw the door was closed, and I opened it, and there I saw the deceased hanging by this rope, so Joseph must have had the rope in his hands and he was showing the jury. From the ridgepole of the tent, so he was hanging by this rope from the ridgepole of the tent. His toes were touching the ground. I could see his face, and we thought the deceased was dead then. We both agreed to leave things as they were and to go and report the occurrence to the police. We both went into Bendigo to the police camp, leaving the deceased as we found him. Now it goes on to describe Sergeant O'Neill and his cutting William down and the way William must have gone about ending his life, but I'll spare you the details. Joseph also believed that William wasn't drunk and didn't have any enemies who would harm him. The final witness was Dr. Harry Lee Atkinson. Dr. Harry spoke of remembering Ellen, William's wife. He said, "I have known William Cochran. I attended to his late wife when they lived near the Star and Garter Hotel in Mitchell Street. I never knew of any lunatic tendency in the deceased." He went on to describe his examination of William's body, noting that there was no sign of violence. William's death was reported in the Bendigo Advertiser on Monday the 18th of December 1865 under the headline "Suicide at Back Creek." For some reason William was referred to as John Cochran, so maybe that was his nickname. The paper reported that he must have been very determined to effect his self-destruction, and he was found to have the sum of only 1 shilling to his name. William's death certificate is interesting. It's the first certificate I've seen where his convict condition is mentioned. It reads 20 years in the colonies and supposed to be a convict. I thought that was quite remarkable. What a sad end to a tough life. Living in a tent at 70 must have been extremely hard, and trying to fossick for gold even harder. William had been a brickmaker for most of his life, and then in the brickmaker chain gangs, so you can imagine the state of his back and his body. It is interesting to note that William was buried in the Methodist section of the cemetery. Perhaps it was in honour of the Wesleyan missionaries that had taken in his wife and cared for her in her last days in Melbourne. Though William has no known descendants, his life has been remembered as part of our extraordinary and unique convict history.
Found it, Dead Dog Gully. Dead Dog Gully, Alluvial Gold Workings. Woohoo! Cobweb. Cobweb. Oh gosh, spider. No, I'm throwing that away. God's sake. Time there would have been hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people living out here. I don't know, maybe thousands, digging for gold. And there's a cemetery here somewhere as well. Would have pitched their tents in the bush, and that is where William lived and died. Oh gosh, oh my gosh, these cobwebs in the trees are too much. Oh, they're everywhere. I don't know how to get through. I can get through that way, so I'll have to go back this way, because I'm not going through a huge cobweb with a spider in the middle for anybody or anything. I don't think it was a very, well, just in a couple of newspaper articles I've read, it didn't seem like a very prosperous place. It's a little bit rough, so I'm not sure how much gold they were getting out of it, but having said that, people were still here, so there must have been some. Oh, there's a gold prospector over there. Wonder what he's doing, looking for gold. Oh, hi. Oh, the lady. There we go. There's the creek. She's panning for gold. Good on her. And there we go, Dead Dog Gully.